Good morning. I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and AsianAviation.com. Welcome to the latest In Conversation, sponsored by Metrojet of Hong Kong. Today we are speaking again with Joshua Ng. He's a director at Alton Aviation based in Singapore. We're going to be talking about urban air mobility. Joshua, welcome.
Welcome. Thanks, and welcome. Very glad to be here.
Good to see you again. Like I said, we're going to talk about urban air mobility, UAM, or advanced air mobility. I wish the industry would decide on a single acronym because there's so many out there. But anyway, Alton, you guys recently issued a report. You said $8 billion. I was amazed by this. $8 billion has been raised by manufacturers for the industry. 12,000 orders have been placed for various models. It seems like everyone is getting into the sector, but when are we going to see regular flights happen?
Yeah, so there is a transition between what you mentioned, urban air mobility, to what we call advanced air mobility today. And I think the transition is largely driven by the technology, right? It's not just the urban environment that's at play. It's also the regional, the cargo, and the medical services that could be offered by this vehicle. So advanced air mobility is just a catch-all for all the types of vehicle technology that could potentially transform the way that we fly. It is true that a lot has been raised in terms of capital and a lot of orders have been placed. I do think that we will see regular flights perhaps 5-10 years down the road, but right now what we're focused on is really getting those initial pilot use cases done right and done successfully. So 2024, I think Paris Olympics going to be a big one where Volocopter and some other partners will be trying to demonstrate the use cases for such flights, and then also in Osaka as well at the World Expo.
Okay. I used to work in Washington, so I know how regulators are. They don't act very quickly when it comes to new technologies and things like this. Again, your report, you talked about the FAA and EASA in Europe. They're developing certification requirements. Seem to be changing a little bit all the time. I saw some reports that the FAA is I don't know, they're changing the rules or updating the rules or whatever. When do you think we're going to see some, is this going to be a long drawn out process, or are we going to have some final regulations? Are they going to be, and are they going to be standard across Europe, standard across America, in both places? They're going to have the same regulations? And also, will they address uncrewed vehicles? I mean, we talk about that later, but let's talk about the regulatory environment.
Yeah, I think the important thing to note, Matt, is that regulations are always evolving. This is obviously a very new type of vehicle, so we do expect that we need a set of baseline recommendations that we can start working off, right? If you look at other aircrafts like the 320s, for example, they are certified today not because of regulations in the 1950s, right? They are certified today because the rules have been evolving over time and incorporating all the learnings that we have from past accidents, from best practices that have evolved over time. So we do expect the FAA and the EASA to get to a baseline recommendation ready for launch, right, in 2024. This might be a limited kind of approval or might be a full approval. We don't know yet. But certainly, I think once the first aircraft actually starts flying, then there will be a lot more evolution in the certification basis to incorporate what we have learned from all those flights of AM vehicles.
Okay, I kind of know the answer to this, but it's kind of which is going to come first, piloted vehicles or uncrewed vehicles. I have my own problems with things like self-driving cars, and I doubt that I would ever fly on an uncrewed vehicle like those being built by EHang or Volocopter or whatever. How does the industry convince people to take a chance on this?
Yeah, so I think to answer your question a bit differently, right? So uncrewed vehicles like drones are already operating today, so they carry cargo. So I think the industry is trying to make sure and test out the use cases that uncrewed operations with cargo could work. For carrying of passengers, I do think we will have to start with piloted vehicles, just like it is today. And I think to get to uncrewed passenger vehicles, there's just going to be a lot of testing that's going to be involved, right? We need the safety to be as close as we can get to commercial jet aircraft standards, where you don't even think about safety when you board a 320 or 737, right? Because you know that that thing flies, and we need to get to the same level of comfort for AAM vehicles as well.
Let's talk about infrastructure. That's one of the main things. Everybody's talking about these vertiports that they want to build. Singapore's talked about it, things like that. I mean, I remember there's a service from JFK in the U.S. to the heliport in the middle of Manhattan. That's no problem. I've seen reports as well that things like parking garages, the roof of a parking garage, would make it easier to get into the middle of the city, which is really what you want. You want to, be in the middle of the city. You don't want to land somewhere outside and then drive in. Give us an idea of what's required from an infrastructure side, and are people making progress on that?
Yeah, I think you gave a great example, right? Today, there's a service that goes from JFK to the heliport in Manhattan. That's maybe going to be, if you're going to expect the type of market we're going to get with AAM vehicles, which is a lot of vehicles traveling in the sky, then the current infrastructure that we have is quite limited, and it won't allow for increased operations. Hence, we do need the rooftops or the parking garages to give us that optionality. It also helps bring the vehicles much closer to the city center. There's always going to be a hassle factor, right? If you had to transfer between an Uber to an AAM vehicle and back to an Uber to get to your final destination, it might just make it simpler to just step in an Uber and not use the AAM option if the hassle factor is too high. And so we do think opening up a lot more infrastructure is going to be key, both from expansion of this market, but also from getting consumers more comfortable and increasing the value proposition of AAM transport.
A couple more questions before we take a quick break. You talked about cargo a little bit, and the airline partners are leading the way mainly on short-haul routes. Is this a way for cargo companies to cut jobs and save money? I mean, why are they leading the way on these things?
Yeah, I think like in your previous question, I think I alluded to the fact that cargo is a much easier use case. Packages don't complain, people do. So you do expect that to operationalize some of these concepts, cargo will definitely lead the way. I don't think it's really a matter of taking away jobs, because I think at the end of the day, this serves a slightly different market. You have your FedEx or UPS that delivers packages maybe to your doorstep every day from all the e-commerce purchases that you make. But if you really need something that's that urgent, right, then the eVTOL might come into play, and this is a very tactical use occasionally type of service that I would expect consumers to be leveraging. But of course, when you scale it up to an entire city, there would be enough services to drive the demand for cargo eVTOL services.
Let's talk about costs for just a second. I mean, for urban air mobility to make sense, or for it to be a mass market, it's got to be priced right. And from all the research that I've read, it seems like it's not going to be a mass market. It's still going to be the price point is still going to be pretty high. Are you seeing that, or are people aiming for the mass market, and are they going to be able to price it that way?
I think certainly when you look at the transportation cost, it's probably going to be much higher than road transportation. I think where there is implicit value is the time savings. So if you were someone who had a higher income level and you value your time more, the time savings that you had, right, traveling from point A to point B, when you compute that in, it still makes sense for you versus someone else. Um, but when we look at business aviation, right, business aviation today is targeted around like the ultra high net worth individuals, right? People like you and me probably uh, would not be able to afford some of this type of travel on a very frequent basis. But I think where AAM is trying to position itself is something like an Uber Black service, right? So for work trips, for business trips, then now you start to get the ability, because at the price point, then you start to be able to afford some of these services in the middle income bracket, I would say. And so it will be as mass market as probably that kind of levels. And I think when you look at it from a holistic point of view, it is certainly a much bigger market for any operator to play in.
Okay, Joshua, we need to take a quick break here. We're going to hear from our sponsor, Metrojet of Hong Kong. We'll be right back after this.
We're going to have the crown jewels of Asia, and I promise you, we're going to have the nicest and busiest business aviation hangar in the region.
And we're back. We're talking with Joshua Ng at Alton Aviation about urban air mobility or advanced air mobility. Pick an acronym. There's lots of them out there. Joshua, I'm a big movie fan. I love watching movies and sci-fi and things like that. You've seen Star Wars, where they have these huge mega cities, flying cars going everywhere and all of that. How will urban air mobility handle air traffic control, and sort of who's leading the way with those standards?
Yeah, I think it will be a partnership, right? Like right today, when we look at air traffic control, it's for helicopters is largely visual flight rules, which is VFR. And that means the pilot will have to be able to sense and be observant of the traffic around him to avoid any accidents. Obviously, in the initial phases of AAM, that's probably okay because we won't see crowded skies above us. But as we start to have more vehicles in the air, then I think the technology element comes into play. We can't have visual flight rules anymore. So the technology is being developed. I think there's participation by the regulators, by the air traffic control folks, and by the ATM, or what we call UTM, unmanned traffic management providers, to integrate both of these systems together holistically, because you still need the ATM systems to control bigger aircraft like your 737, A320s, but you still do need to have a separate system to be able to control all the AAM aircraft that will be flying as well.
Let's talk about fuel for a minute. Sustainability is the big thing right now. Everybody's talking about SAF. Everybody's talking about hydrogen, whether it's liquid hydrogen or fuel cells, things like that. What does Alton's research show that they're going to be electrically powered, but is it going to be generated by hydrogen? Is it going to be a sustainable aviation fuel? What does your research show?
Yeah, I think the move is towards net zero, right? And so when we think about net zero, batteries, if they run off a clean electric grid, will definitely get us there. And hydrogen, if it's produced sustainably as well, will also get us there. I think electricity or electric powered vehicles are furthest along, I would say, because the auto industry largely has moved towards hybrid electric or fully electric vehicles today. Hydrogen is somewhat a bit more challenging, only because it is a volatile gas, gaseous form, right? And we don't really have the infrastructure on a wide scale to develop it. Not to say that it won't ever happen. It's just that there's a lot more considerations that needs to happen and to be put in place before we get to hydrogen-powered aircraft. But one thing I think, Matt, that has emerged is the concept of the hybrid electric vehicle. This is what we have seen in the auto industry, right? With the Priuses that have been running around for 10, 15 years. We all recognize that the industry is starting to recognize that fully electric won't get us the range and the benefits that we need to open up the use cases. But if we added in a gas-powered engine, right, running on fossil fuel or in the future SAF, that will help us get us the range and open up a lot more possibilities for operators to operate this aircraft, right? If the coming from Singapore, the parallel is, if you had an electric vehicle today, maybe you might go from Singapore to Johor Bahru, which is in Malaysia, just across the causeway. But if you had a hybrid electric vehicle, you could possibly fly it all the way up to KL, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And you can imagine that's a much bigger market to serve than just to go to Johor Bahru.
Okay. Let's talk about, we've got an MRO show coming up in Singapore in the next couple of weeks. I'll be there. Hopefully I'll run into you maybe. But let's talk about MRO for a minute. I saw Alton's report. HAECO has done a deal with EHang in China for maintenance, repair, and overhaul. Are there other deals happening out there? And how are these partnerships going to work? Does HAECO, are they putting staff into the factory at EHang and watching how they're putting everything together? Or, how is the maintenance going to work?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of partnerships that are going on, but not so much concrete policies or manuals or programs that have been developed. I think the OEMs are rightly focusing on the design, the manufacturing of their vehicle. And once they get to a certain stage where they're comfortable with certification, then they will start thinking about how are they going to repair and to maintain those aircraft. I'm not aware of the specifics on whether HAECO has people in the EHang factory or vice versa, but certainly what we have seen is the OEMs have hired from the airlines, from the MROs, so that they can help understand. They can understand how do operators think about maintenance, and incorporate some of that learning into the design and the manufacturing of their vehicles.
Okay. Now I'm just curious because you're seeing a lot of people that they're not outsourcing MRO, they're sort of bringing it back in house in many cases, and I'm just curious as to why someone would want to outsource the MRO if they could just do it in house. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Let's get back to public support, and this is the last question. Is there public support out there? Are people taking this seriously, or is it just the industry taking it seriously? I mean, the billions of dollars of investment shows that obviously the industry is taking it seriously. How do you convince the public that this is a good thing, and it's a good way to get around?
Yeah, I think the only way, Matt, is really to get the vehicles flying, get people butts in the aircraft seats and see whether they enjoy the service that's being offered. I think acceptance generally happens after entering service, not before. So it is really about industry to push it forward. And I think another equally strong advocate would be the governments who are thinking about maybe economic development or transportation infrastructure planning. Those considerations would help to guide people in the direction of launching services. But at the end of the day, the quantum and the extent of the services will ultimately be decided by the consumers and whether they accept and find the use cases compelling.
Okay, I said that was the last question, but I lied. Actually, I want to follow up on something. You mentioned 2024 Paris Olympics. We might see some trial runs and things like that. But give us kind of a timeline of when you think this is going to be sort of an established reality.
Yeah, we did a survey and we asked the question, right? When do we think regular operations will happen in 2035? Right? Is it going to be very limited operations? Or are we going to see full-scale operations? Or is it somewhere in between where it's like moderate operations in some cities? I think most people landed at about in the moderate category. So what this means is some of the bigger cities that have started to pursue or to enable AAM in the city environment, cities like Singapore or Paris or in Japan, for example, will probably lead because they are already thinking about it. And once these services get launched, they will move very quickly towards advancing it as part of the transportation infrastructure within the city. But then, of course, there are cities that have not started thinking about it, right? Some of the cities, let's say in Indonesia or in the Philippines, might be a bit slower, for example, and they might take a few more years to get there. So I think for some of those cities, you expect that maybe it's going to be limited operations by 2035, and then maybe if you look 5-10 years down the road, then they'll get to moderate or full-scale operations in the city. So that's where we think the trajectory will be in the future.
Okay, great. Joshua Ng, Director at Alton Aviation in Singapore. Thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thank you very much, Matt.